Hey everybody, welcome back to the Instigator podcast. Happy Thanksgiving to you all. Whether you're listening to this on Wednesday, maybe Thursday before the festivities begin, or even if it's after the holiday, happy to have you with us. And don't have a whole bunch to talk about this week. The Sabres' schedule's been a little wonky. Big break last week between the Tuesday loss to the Bruins and then Friday's game in Winnipeg. They came back Sunday against Chicago. They play Wednesday evening, as we record this on Tuesday against Washington, and then they're again off until Friday. So the NHL schedule also a little goofy right now. Um, but as a result, Sabres haven't played a bunch of games since we've recorded. They've only played a couple times, and 500 in those two games. It was too bad. 3-2 loss to the Jets on Friday night. They come back with a 3-2 win over Chicago on Sunday, as I mentioned. And they're still, Tyler, they're still right around 500. They're just, they're kind of hanging around right now. But I worry that if they don't, and it's not so much that they need to go on like a big, like 8-0-1 run or anything like that. But if they don't start getting, a few more 2 wins and 4 out of 5 type stretches, they are going to, I feel like, fall off this pace because last time we talked about this, actually, it might have even been last week. They like the Atlantic Division was still real close. Like the Bruins were way out in front, but really everyone was really pretty packed in. But now the Sabres are 5 points off the pace of the Lightning. They're 2 points behind the Red Wings, and the top four are the Bruins, Panthers, Maple Leafs, Lightning. Similarly, if you look in the Metro, the Rangers well out in front of everyone else. Flyers, Capitals, Hurricanes. That division more of a logjam. So the wild card race, very much something that the Sabres are still alive in. But like I said, they're risking falling off the pace of the rest of the conference if they keep up with this, you know, trading wins and losses. Last week wasn't especially kind to them, dropping the 4-0 loss to the Penguins, the 5-2 loss to the Bruins. We talked a little bit about it last week on the show. And then following that up with that loss to the Jets. You drop 3 straight, that's where it starts really getting out of hand for you. So they really need to take advantage of the Capitals. That team has struggled for the most part out of the gate, though they've kind of righted the ship lately. And they really need to take some points off them because they're coming right back with the Penguins on Friday, Devils Saturday, Rangers Monday. So it's not getting any easier anytime soon for them. So they need to find themselves, and this is something that I feel like has been a talking point for most of the season, both with us and the larger general public.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they haven't been cut adrift from the chasing pack, if you will. I mean, that's the positive of their up and down play. They're kind of alternating here. But as you said, the longer they go without a stretch of 10 games where they go like 6-3-1, something
Yep.
like that. Just a little something to give them a little juice. The odds are that the teams that they're going to be chasing do. You know what I mean? The Maple Leafs are a perfect example. The Maple Leafs are not a team that you would expect the Sabres to be competing with this year, but they've won 4 in a row. I mean, somehow they have only 5 regulation wins in 17, but 4 wins in a row. And, they're 5 points clear of the Sabres with a game in hand. And really the Sabres are kind of, starting to lose contact with that front 3 in their own division. And that's not including, Tampa Bay, who's right there with them. So really the front 4 in their division, they've won 3 in a row. And that's, again, this is a Tampa Bay team without Andrei Vasilevsky. So this was one of those years where you looked at the teams that they were competing with and you said, okay, well, team A is missing this and team B is missing this. And this team's had these guys retire. And the Sabres haven't been able to take advantage of these early season opportunities, not necessarily head-to-head opportunities, but these opportunities to put points in the bank. When you're looking at the East already, and you're like, I mean, I think there's realistically 1 playoff spot available, and we're sitting here 2 days before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I think Boston, Florida, and Toronto will all make the playoffs. I think the Rangers are obviously going to make the playoffs. I think the Hurricanes are going to make the playoffs. I think the Devils with Jack Hughes back will make the playoffs. And really, so all that leaves you is, that second wild card. And, the teams that you're going to be competing directly against are surprisingly teams like Philadelphia, who've won 5 in a row, a team that the Sabres do not match up well against. I mean, I'm just happy we only play them once more. The Capitals, as you said, started off old, slow, tired. All of a sudden, are 8-1-1 their last 10 and have won 4 in a row. So, extremely important that they lay down a marker and don't let the Capitals get too far ahead. Because it's obviously early in the season where you're not really looking at the games played column, but there's teams all over the board. The Capitals are one of them where they're a couple points ahead and they have 3 games in hand. So it's like, gotta get 2 there. Don't necessarily need them in regulation this early in the year, but you need to start collecting points for sure.
For sure, and even like that Metro, it's like someone turned that division upside down in a way. Flyers, a team in the midst of a rebuild, looking at retooling and resetting roster in some parts, second in that division right now. Capitals, as you mentioned, that very, very quiet start. They're third, whereas the Devils, Islanders, both at the bottom of the division, just above the very lowly Columbus Blue Jackets. So it's a situation where you can lose pace very quickly
Well,
if you're
and
not.
it's another perfect example here, Chris. I apologize for
Oh, please go ahead.
interrupting, but the the whispers were starting to turn into chants, turns into shouting on Long Island there to fire Lane Lambert
Hmm.
or make a move because they had lost so many in a row, but they were getting that elusive loser point, that the Sabres haven't been able to get the last season plus. And, they managed to win one in a shootout on the West Coast, and there they are ahead of the Sabres as a result. You know what I mean? It's just
Yeah, it's true.
that's just how tightly packed these things are. And you look back at the Sabres schedule, and that Winnipeg game, you look back and you're like, if you could just get a point there, or the New Jersey game, like figure out a way to get it to the bonus period, and you never know what happens. And it's just, as we move forward here, yes, like you want wins, but at bare minimum, they've got to get into overtime and give themselves a shot there, and start collecting points kind of the greasy way, if you will, so that they can start to be beginning to build a little bit of momentum.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that Islanders team 6-6-5. If you just assume the Sabres, even 2 of their 9 losses, if they're 8-7-3, they are tied with the Red Wings in points. The tiebreakers are probably going to go the Red Wings are right now, but tied with the Red Wings in points. They're above then the Islanders aforementioned, the Devils, and Penguins. It's that it happens that quickly. So that's just that's 1 win's worth of points, or again, as you're talking about with the loser points that the Islanders are accumulating at 6-6-5. So yeah, it's just it's a twofold case. You made a good point. They're the games that are close, they're not able to get them tied or carry them into that extra period. They're losing in regulation. And then in turn, something that's plagued the most of this season, and I know the injuries are part of it, and it's only gotten worse with Tage Thompson going out, but the lack of offense overall is hurting them. There was that stretch there at the end of October where they seemed to find their footing a bit. That 6-4 Senators game, they lost 5-4 to the Devils. They hang 4 on the Avs. They had a nice stretch of games offensively for the most part there. But then right back into it here early in mid-November, 2 goals, 3 goals, 0, 2. It's right back to that 2 goal a night average, if you will, and it's harming them. And I was pulling some data on evolving hockey today, and like just looking at the matrix of expected goals, just looking at their expected goal matrix. If you look at 22-23, the Sabres are in the bottom right quadrant, so they are trending positively in expected goals for, but trending a little bit more negatively in expected goals against. So if you were labeling that bottom right quadrant, it would be like, high event. They were playing high event games. And as we knew from last year, their goaltending let them down. They didn't get enough saves, and that didn't help them. If you then flip the switch to 23-24, the Sabres are actually almost in the exact inverse position. They are in the upper left quadrant, so the low event quadrant, if you will, where they're trending positively in expected goals against, and again, like nearly a whole half goal improvement in terms of how they've cleaned up their D zone, but they're also trending then in the wrong direction, if you will, for expected goals for. So they're not quite driving the play the way that they need to. And again, they're missing now Tage Thompson. Alex Tuck has been up and down. He missed a handful of games. I think it's safe to assume that he has been dealing with something. Obviously, Jack Quinn is out. We spent a lot of time last week talking about how the Sabres aren't necessarily lacking for depth. Their pipeline is really robust, but the way that they're currently constructed, they went from last year being a really interesting 3-line team to this year being a 2, maybe even 1.5 line team, depending on the finishing skill of the line breakdown. So it's really interesting to me to see like this commitment to improved defensive zone responsibility has paid off. They have been much better in their own zone. They're helping their goaltenders more. They're getting more saves as a result because they're not putting their goaltenders in really precarious situations. But on the other hand, geez, I dare I say they've almost gone too far because they haven't been able to find their identity offensively. And at times, I'm almost left wondering if the players are maybe, I don't want to say overthinking it because, again, they're getting the defensive results, but are they a little bit too afraid to take those chances, to take those opportunities, whether it be on the rush or simply in the offensive zone. And that's why you're not seeing the rediscovery or the continuation of what they did succeed with last year and being that super fun fire wagon brand of hockey in many ways. But and again, I think if they can solve this offensive lull, if they can get the wheels rolling a little bit, and it worked. It was from the back out. It's from the defense. Rasmus Dahlin at times just looked a little sleepy. Right up until their top line. If they can find that rhythm, even just half of it right now, I think all of a sudden you're seeing the results that we were just talking about before in terms of the standings points. And I think that's right now. I think that's the X factor of this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those years where the offensive game just hasn't been able to click. And, you wonder if it's a renewed focus on the defensive zone, whatever the issue is. Obviously, the injuries that you hit on are probably a big part of it, right? You've been able to, we go back to last week and all of a sudden you have one injury to start the year with Jack Quinn. You're unable to move Victor Olofsson, so you try to move him, into the lineup and out of the lineup, and now you're dealing with that headache, for lack of a better term, on a nightly basis, and then you're moving guys around to fill other spots when other guys go out. So there's just not the continuity. There's not the scoring depth, as you said up front, and it's just. It's frustrating because, you look at the schedule that they have, and this is kind of the make or break here. The next, I mean, I don't want to say make or break because it's early, but, between now and Christmas, they really have games, they have a part of the schedule where you should expect them to collect more points than they leave on the table. You know what I mean? And I say that despite the injuries. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, the next two, Washington and Pittsburgh, are games where you need to collect points. And then there's obviously tough games because there's not any throwaway games unless you've got Columbus on your schedule, right? But you've got teams like St. Louis and Nashville and Detroit and Montreal and Arizona, who is improved, but you have Arizona twice. You have Columbus. You have all these teams coming up in the next 4 weeks. And it's interesting because you listen to the national media, and the national media obviously is talking about teams like the Calgary Flames and the Edmonton Oilers about how they're out of runway. They can't afford to lay an egg and give away points. And the Sabres obviously have quote unquote runway, but I'm looking at it and it's like, I don't know if they have the ability to go and, hypothetically lose to Columbus. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I know what you're saying. Like, yeah,
It's
that
just,
stretch.
it's not an option.
Yeah, that stretch starting with like the Predators on the 3rd of December.
Yes.
There's a couple games. The Bruins are sprinkled in there, Golden Knights, Avs. Like, there's some tough opponents sprinkled in there. But realistically, from the December 3rd right up until that Leafs game on the 21st, yeah, they got a handful of those are games that you should be
You've got 9 games
really
and
expecting a win.
you've got 9 games and maybe you need to go 5-3-1, 5-2-2, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a ripe stretch for them, and it comes on the heels, as I was mentioning, like this coming weekend and into early next week, a little more challenging, right? Penguins are up and down, but they kicked the crap out of the Sabres
Yeah,
last game, but
they're up now.
yeah, exactly.
And so is Washington.
Correct. Yeah, so like this is a tricky little stretch leading into that Predators. If that's the benchmark, but yeah, like December has an opportunity to be beneficial to the Sabres. It really does. So, and all of this is to say, we're talking about where how they find the rhythm and find the right fit on this roster. A little bit more line tweaking today at practice, if I'm not mistaken. Zach Benson up with Casey Middleton and JJ Peterka. Jordan Greenway down with Tyson Jost and Victor Olofsson. I could be wrong on when that swap precisely happened, but the Sabres also facing a decision on Zach Benson because Wednesday, should he play, will be game number 9. So he will be at the end of his rope for his entry level slide. Now, this is more than just a black and white. Will he play game number 10? There's a little bit more into the decision making process for all NHL teams, not the Sabres. But bottom line is, if he plays Wednesday, and then if he is then again on the ice on Friday, you officially trigger the first year of his entry level contract. So you will burn that year of his contract. Now, whether or not the Sabres opt to do that remains to be seen. They have gotten pretty close to World Junior Camps. The rosters, the roster guessing has begun, but that is part of the decision making. Now, the other part that needs to be remembered here is that if he doesn't get to 41 games, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong on the number, Tyler, he does not toll the year of his contract. So, or toll a full NHL season. So he would still, going into the final year of his entry level contract, he would still technically, and again, this is if they were to decide to send him back before he hits that like 40 game mark. If they were to send him back, he would technically still have 0 years of NHL experience, which is a little goofy quirk within the CBA, but it still would then give the Sabres leverage when it comes time to sign his next contract, even though you would burn that first year.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere around like 38 to 41, somewhere
Yeah,
in there. I don't have the exact number,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and to be honest with you, the roster makeup right now, I mean, he's a top 6 forward for you. So, and they're only carrying 12. I think it's important to point out that they have 12, 8, and 3 with the club right now. So, I mean, all signs are pointing to Zach Benson playing game number 10, sooner rather than later here.
Yeah.
And
it is 40 games, just very quickly. Sorry.
How many?
40, according to
40. Okay, so we were right there.
Yep.
I guess if you play a half season, you round up. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But if they opt to send the Zach Benson down to the Western League, then you need to either ride with 11 and 7, which they've done at some point, but you'd think they would call up a forward regardless. So
Yeah, right.
um,
Yeah, they'll have to do something.
they'll have to do something.
Yeah.
And truly, like if you take out Zach Benson from this team right now, like who is there to who's
I know.
healthy
Yeah.
to play in the top six? And Benson is like, yes, you would like some more counting stats, I think, from him, given the role that he's now in, but not to point to the charts, but analytically, the eye test, like everything is there.
Yeah, he's been very good.
He looks
He's been
like he
very good.
belongs. It's not one of those things where um it's not the Cody Franson where you look and you watch Cody Franson play, and you're like, how is this guy in the league? He's got the turning radius of a greyhound, and then you look at natural stat trick, and all of a sudden he's good. And I mean, no, both of them are, both ways of looking at the game are pointing to Zach Benson, being a legitimate NHL player right now. So, I mean, I think they've got to keep him. I think for whatever reason, if they do not, you're going to have to call up Yuri Kulig, whether, you have to drag Kevin Adams kicking and screaming to the transaction wire to do it.
Yeah, it's him or Roseanne or both.
Yeah. And,
Right.
that's the other thing too, is depending if and when guys get healthy, um, you could, kind of loan him to the World Junior team as a loophole for a couple weeks, if Jack Quinn comes back, or if you want to get a look at a guy like Kulik or Roseanne and Benson kind of slumps a little bit, that's a perfect way to not send him to the dub, but give somebody else a look for a couple weeks. So
Yeah.
there's plenty of ways to play with it, but in the same breath, he can't go back to the Western League right now.
No, they can't. They really just can't afford to lose him, quite frankly, because Victor Olofsson. They seems pretty evident that they don't care to have him in the lineup if they don't need to, and he's having to get a regular shift now because they're so shorthanded when it comes to their forward group, and they're also carrying 8 defensemen. They have Ryan Johnson up, and he's proving to be also too good to send down, quite frankly. So between that and their 3-headed goalie monster, they have not given themselves a lot of wiggle room to play with their roster. So you make a good point about World Juniors. If they do choose to send him down, maybe they're hoping to spark a little bit more offense. Even if he scores a couple goals in World Juniors, maybe he comes back a little bit more confidence from a shooting perspective. Not sure, um, but that would give them a little bit more runway to decide on whether or not they want to keep him for the full season. More runway on Jack Quinn coming back, and get a look at some of those other guys too. It's a good, really really good point to bring up. The other thing that I think about Benson is that, and you mentioned the county stat thing, of course, but he's had at least one golden opportunity. He just got robbed,
Yep.
but he's had a couple looks, and it would be maybe a weight off everyone's shoulders if he had 2 goals and maybe like 1 or 2 more assists, right? Like if you just had a couple more ticks in the ticks on the box score, maybe you're like, yeah, no, no, we're okay with this. We're going to be able to let this kid play it out. Get him his rest when he needs it, but we'll be able to let him run this season. I do wonder, that goose egg in the goal column maybe starts weighing on them a little bit heavier than it otherwise would have. But I think right now it's just it's really hard to look at this roster where they're effective and be like, no, they could survive sending Zach Benson down, because I just think it would be the exact opposite of correct. But they may value that entry level slide. Maybe that, and here's the thing, just to play devil's advocate, maybe we get to tomorrow, maybe they play 11-7 on Friday, and again, they kick the can a little further down the road. It's a back to back on Friday and Saturday. I don't think they'd want to do 11-7 again, but maybe they just try to draw this thing out a little bit longer. Just 2, 3, 4 more days before they're like, yeah, you know what, we'll send them down, and then they bring Kulik up in his stead or something like that. That'd be the only thing I would wonder, is if if they're just trying to delay the inevitable that teeny little bit more, or not the inevitable, but to delay their decision a teeny little bit more, and then finally say like, okay, we're going to send him back because we want to preserve the contract, and we'll finally quote unquote admit defeat and bring up Kulik or Roseanne.
Yeah, and too, there's Kyle Oposo has hit 1,000 games, so there is the option to give him a night off if need be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
do wonder if they'll ever, if they're at that, if that's a conversation they've had.
yeah, I don't. It's tough to scratch your captain. Like that is a
Correct.
real, So I'm not saying they don't do it or don't have that discussion, but I think if they do it, it's one of those. He's day to day with an injury. He's got some maintenance. It's not. He's never going to be listed just as a straight up a healthy scratch, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I still look at this bottom six, and I'm just like, this is no good. You know what I mean? And they're good enough. They have enough talent to beat the Chicago Blackhawks because the Blackhawks stink. But as this schedule becomes more, tightens up a little bit in terms of games you need to have against opponents that you can beat, but you need all hands on deck here. You can't have passengers. And I just look at their lineup and I just see too many guys that, as a coach, as a fan, as a general manager, like I don't know how you trust them in any sort of medium leverage situation, let alone like a 1-goal game with 10 minutes left in the game. You know what I mean? So that really like handcuffs your ability to do anything. Like, you're basically down to 2 lines. You're running 10 guys for a period if need be, and we're in November. Like, you've got to get more depth
I know.
up to the
Yeah.
NHL roster.
Yeah, and we've talked about this now 2 weeks in a row, and it's interesting to see how much longer they even want to wait on like maybe Devin Levi or any of the goaltenders for that matter. I think right now, given how the three have played, Levi would be the logical choice to send down. It's pretty evident that that's not what they want to do because they'd be admitting defeat on admitting failure, quite frankly, on their offseason plans for goal. But it's that he's the easiest one to send. He's waiver ineligible, so you don't have to worry about losing him. You can get him more games, really get him a lot more games in the AHL if you do send him down, and ideally put him in a more controlled environment, and it gives you that roster spot you so desperately need. And I would add
And
Jacob Bryson. I mean, what are we doing here? I mean,
yeah,
you're carrying 8 defensemen for, I mean, quite frankly, no good reason. I understand that Henry Okihari was sick, so I guess technically Bryson was their 7 for a couple days
a
there.
couple
But like,
days, yeah.
yeah, you're carrying 8 defensemen for really no reason other than the fact that you can't simply send Ryan Johnson down because he's played too well.
He's too well.
But
He's not going
yeah,
anywhere.
Bryson's not getting in the lineup, and I mean, the other thing that they could do is put on a brave face and scratch either Eric Johnson or Connor Clifton if they really wanted to, keep that 12-6 balance. But they've also been very hesitant to do that. So they're a lot of this is a situation of their own doing, and I can't completely blame them for it because again, like given how well Johnson's played, I wouldn't send him down either. So I get it, but the Bryson, that's an easy fix, right? Easy fix, easy solution to your issue from the roster numbers. Same thing with the net. If as you are evaluating and as you see how these three goaltenders have played, it's not a bad thing if you decide that you want Devin Levi to A, play a few more games, but maybe more importantly, B, get him in a situation where he'll be a little bit more confident in his play and allow him to develop a little bit more versus having to carry more, a heavier weight of expectations. So that's 2 roster spots right there. Victor Olsen doesn't have to play anymore. Just with those 2 moves, because you can call up 2 forwards from Rochester, whether it be a depth guy like Rusek or Brett Murray even, or if you want a higher skilled, high leverage type in your equal or Isaac Roseanne. So I just it's staring right in the face. I just they're it's an NHL team, so they're gonna take their sweet time making their decision.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you in terms of the goaltending. Um, the the waiver status obviously helps, but and as you said, Levi had his own net tonight or today in practice, so you're giving
Right.
Levi the tougher game. You're giving him the team that's won 5 in a row on the road instead of, the easier game, which was the worst, one of the worst teams in the league in Chicago. So they obviously still view Levi, in my opinion, as at least their number 2, if not their number 1, because, in my opinion, UPL deserves the net against Washington. But that's not going to be the case. And, they're now going to be roughly 4 weeks since a goaltender started 2 games in a row, which what are we doing here? This is, it's a season where you're trying to win. I've said this before. Everybody has said, playoffs are bust, for lack of a better term. And the goaltending rotation has basically been, well, it's his turn,
Hmm.
which is not how, that's a youth hockey coaching mindset. Not to sound too critical, but it is what it is. You have to call a spade, and when a goalie gets hot or plays well enough to earn the net for a second time, you have to recognize that, regardless of who that goalie is. You know what I mean? So I don't.
Yeah, they've got to reward that play.
Yeah,
Luukkonen, and he got that reward last year. In January, he played great, and they kept giving him the net, right? They didn't have many other choices, but they kept giving it to him, right? And
yeah, he went on that heater because it was him or
yeah, shooter tutor basically. But
nobody.
yeah, they could play. Craig Anderson was allowed to play once a week, so Luukkonen was playing almost by default. But he rewarded them for the faith that they showed him, and he gave them really good performances. He's giving them very, very good performances right now. I have been critical of Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen this summer. Like there are a lot of red flags in his game, but he has got himself really dialed in right now, and he's played very, very well. And given how he's played these last handful of games for them, and I would even go to that Penguins game when they got, he didn't get any help. You're not going to win many games when you score 0 goals, but he didn't get much help. He had, maybe 1 or 2 questionable goals against, but it. I only really counted one against him that I was really like, yeah, that was a great goal. But he's given them some really good starts lately, and he's given them an opportunity to win games, and they need to ride that. And I understand that they have 3 goalies to get through. I understand that they need to try to keep all of these guys fresh, and Levi's coming up he's on a full week since he played last, so I get it. I understand what the problem is, but this is why you don't carry 3 goalies. I'm sorry. They need to be grown ups and make a choice here, because they're really setting themselves up to fail worse because of trying to juggle this goalie situation, as opposed to letting the players who are in rhythm playing their best, giving them the best opportunity to win, to get games.
Yeah, I mean we are 18 games into the season. Obviously, Washington will be game number 19. And Devin Levi remains the only goaltender to start back-to-back games when all 3 of them have been healthy.
Yeah, it's
Because
wild.
Levi got hurt. I'm sorry, Comrie also did. So UPL's the only one. So Levi started the first 4, got hurt or got sore or whatever. Comrie got the Islanders game. They gave him the net again because he played well. Then he got hurt the Montreal game, if I'm not mistaken. And then the UPL had that run because he was the only healthy goalie again, so same as last year. It was either him or Devin Cooley. And since Levi came back, they've alternated, and then Comrie had his first start back in Winnipeg. So, I don't.
I think Comrie got hurt against the Devils.
Was it the Devils?
Yeah.
Okay, so
But he got back-to-back starts.
he got
You're right
back-to-back
about that. Yeah.
starts. And Luukkonen was the goalie of record because in New Jersey because Comrie got hurt early.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I also, I mean, I don't want to also, not mention your point about Jacob Bryson. I mean, that's got to be, it's 100% obvious. That's a guy, there's teams that need defensemen. He's not making a ton of money. You trade him for a fifth or a sixth and you move along. And if you can't trade him, send him down. And again, it's one of those things where if somebody claims him, then somebody claims him. You know what I mean? Cap space is an asset, and it's quite evident, not only in the near term or the immediate term, but also in the medium to long term that there's not really a space for him. He's 26 years old. Eric Johnson has very obviously passed him on the depth chart. Dare I say Nikita Novikov isn't that far behind him either. You have Riley Stillman down there. Like, there's plenty of guys that would fill, the eighth defenseman spot on the roster on the depth chart if Jacob Bryson were to be claimed. So I think that's an easy move. And, as you said, it would allow you to call up a forward of, really any playing style, and it would give you much more flexibility in terms of how you wanted to set up your forward group.
Yeah, could not have said that better myself. You're 100% right. And yeah, so this, and that's where we are right now. The Sabres, they're lacking offense. They are bloated in some weird spots in their roster with opportunities to make some slight tweaks in who's been called up and who isn't, and could give them more flexibility up front where they need it. And it's just a matter of when they decide to make those decisions. And I don't know if they're gonna try to wait out these injuries or if they're gonna, you know, make some more ballsy decisions. I don't know. We're gonna have to see. Very quickly, Tyler, just to wrap things up. The NHL is moving towards a resolution, I guess, on a World Cup. Um, they're going to try to run a limited version of the event in 2025, and then kind of as a ramp up, I guess you'd say, to the 2026 Olympics, with the expectation that the NHL will be back for 2026, and then also for 2030, which will be in Vancouver. That's a pretty easy one that the NHL would want to be involved in. So I think the coming back for 2026 is probably a way to try to be proactive and extend an olive branch to the IOC. But the 2025 World Cup remix, and we're going to talk about it here in a second, would also then set them up to, as reports indicate, have the World Cup then occur regularly on a 4-year basis opposite the Olympics. Now, I'll believe this when I see it, because at some point the Olympics are going to wind up being on a 12-hour time difference in North America, and the NHL is not going to want to send players. So I have some doubts about how this rotation can work out, but I'm cautiously optimistic about their plans for the World Cup, because the bottom line for me with the World Cup, the biggest mistake the NHL continues to make is not devoting the time, resources, and attention to it that is needed to make it a worthwhile and valuable event on the hockey calendar. Having it intermittently, I mean, we've had it 2 times in the last 20 years. That's preposterous to me. To not be having a league sanctioned best on best tournament, that's just utterly insane. And so the NHL is going to try to bring it back here for 2025. It would be a scaled down version. It will not be an official World Cup of Hockey because, among others, Russia will not be invited. Right now, it looks like it's going to be a 4-team tournament, which would likely be the U.S., Canada, and then likely Sweden and Finland. I have two competing thoughts on this, Tyler. The first is that I'm just glad that they're going to get the ball rolling again. I think they need to quote Seinfeld, if you're knocking over the vending machine, it's going to take a few pushes, right? So, get the thing rocking with this 4-team tournament with the hopes that they get get that momentum moving and keep it moving for 2028. That being said, doing a 4-team tournament, assuming that it's the countries that have been mentioned, I don't see the value in that format of just having Team USA, Team Canada, Team Sweden, Team Finland. I think it'll be fine. But generally speaking, I think it's gonna leave a lot of people wanting more. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts because it just seems really thin to do it that way, like a little bit of a four nations showcase. I just don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sold on that approach for it.
Um, I mean, well, I agree. It's better than nothing. As you said, you got to start somewhere, basically. Um, but this is a tournament that you have to have 8 teams. Um, there are enough hockey playing nations um, to be competitive on a world stage, on a global stage, where you could have 8 and have competitive teams. Um, so removing Russia, to do it the easy way, you would take the top 8, not including Russia, ranked teams in the IIHF rankings. And I mean, just right off the hop, I'm not saying Germany is a better team than Sweden, but Germany is currently ranked higher than Sweden. So, the likes of Leon Draisaitl and Tim Stützle and all those guys are going to say, okay, so you're going to have this quote unquote World Cup, and you're going to invite a team that's ranked lower than we are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
so
I actually thought that more about the Finns than the Swedes. I'm just thinking off the top. This is just top of my head. No research. I'll fully admit it. I was like, man, how strong is this Finnish team going to be? I
well,
know,
the Finns are
it's Mashinado.
allegedly, a second. They're ranked second right now, and that just a lot
Good
of
for
this is
them.
based.
Jesus Christ.
A lot of this is based, on the World
World
Championships,
Championships, yeah.
obviously, and
Tyler,
uh,
maybe this is why the NHL doesn't want to do more European events because guys like us are like, what? This team's ranked second. What the hell's going on here?
yeah. I mean, but there's enough, there's enough talent. I'd have a tough time not having the Czechs and the Slovaks in. You know, you have a country that won a gold medal in one of the few tournaments where they did best on best in the Olympics in the Czechs, and you're saying, nah, like World Cup, you're not invited. You know what I
Right.
mean? And you don't want
Yeah.
to, lean too far on the history, but um, I think it would add greater importance to the upcoming um, World Championships, because right now Slovakia is in ninth, and Latvia and Denmark are right there within a shout to perhaps nab that last spot if you were to go just by rankings points, and get that 8th spot. I thought the even funnier thing was that they were talking about having it basically be a week-long event in February, I think they said, and they're going to have Sweden and Finland play over in Europe. And it's like, well, that's not going to really grow the game, because the game is going to be on, you got to have a TV partner in, right? Just like, if this is the conversation that we haven't had regarding the global series. You had 4 really, really good games, and they were all on the NHL Network because they couldn't convince either ESPN or TNT to carry the games.
Yeah, that was
So
too bad because the timing could be great,
yeah, I
right?
mean,
Like
what else is
F1
on
has gotten a
TNT
nice
at
little
11?
foothold.
Yeah,
Right, yeah, like F1 has a nice little foothold, and that's mostly due in part to the Netflix series, but it also is on in the mornings.
yeah,
So
but
it's the same with soccer, right? You can start your day with it. It doesn't eat up your entire weekend if you're going to
yeah,
watch like the NFL along with it, right? It works out really well. So why not? They made such a big deal about staggering the games for the frenzy. there's your golden opportunity. To your point, Tyler, they couldn't get the buy-in, which is understandable.
Yeah,
But
I mean, you had the one
that's what I do
game.
like about it, though. Like I will say, like if they do this right, you could have that Sweden and Finland game start at say 12 o'clock Eastern time,
Yeah,
and it could run right into USA Canada at 3:30 or what however it's structured.
yeah. I
Like
mean,
that could be
it's
great. That
just
could be really cool.
you've got to be able to dedicate the proper time with it. And if eventually, as you said, you want it 4 years alternating opposite the Olympic cycle. And I they say, start with four, maybe get to six, get to eight. Well, the more teams you bring in, the longer you're going to need, right? You can't run an 8-team tournament in a week. Teams need to get together, need to skate. You can't play 5 games in 7 days. It's just, for obvious reasons, it doesn't work. So,
Yeah,
if you're going to, if the goal is to play in the Olympics and send players to the Olympics, why wouldn't you just every 4 years or every two, because it would be alternating, every 2 years, just have your World Cup in what would be the Olympic window and take that amount of time and play your hockey tournament?
that's what I would do.
Because
Yeah,
you know
that would be my
the
solution
more
too.
the more games you cram into a smaller amount of time, it raises the the odds of teams or players suffering those injuries that the league and the PA are so fearful of, and the overall quality of play is better. If a a Canada Sweden game or a US Finland game or a Czechia Slovakia game, one of the teams isn't on the second of back to backs or the third and four nights. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it just helps the event in so many different ways, and you can alternate. The US and Canada can obviously host, um so that alternating years, say it's in North America, so some of those buildings get some revenue during the break, um and then it can go over to those countries that host the worlds. It's not like these countries can't host major events. They host the worlds. Latvia hosted the worlds, for God's sake. You know what I mean? Like, you can host an 8-team tournament best on best in Sweden. You can host it in Finland. You can host it in Germany. It is possible.
No question. And you know what I would do for this 2025 version is, since you're going to be so limited and you're only going to be, they're not going to want to do the Team North America thing anymore, and nor should they. That I think that was such a unique circumstance with the
Mm-hmm.
amount of talent, the right draft classes congealing at the same time. It, the talent from the last handful of draft classes just isn't equivalent to what they had then, and certainly for Team Canada, they were going to leave too many players out, right? So it made sense to do Team North America. They don't need that this time around. But what I do think is, since you are going to be potentially, certainly leaving out the Russians because that's the expectation, but you're going to be leaving out the Czechs and the Slovaks and Germans, Swiss, the players from those other outlying European countries who don't generally really compete at at high level when it comes to the best on best tournaments, or international tournaments, I should say. You could just like turn this thing on its head. So instead of trying to shoehorn this, like, okay, it's gonna be international best on best, which really for the NHL just means like we're gonna try to get a USA Canada matchup, right? Like that's what they're hoping for. But
All
instead
the
of
international best on best is as NHL players are involved.
correct
Yeah.
for the TV product, that's the golden goose, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's 2010, 2010 Olympics. That's what they're hoping to get again. So rather than trying to just chase your tail just for that being the outcome, why not take your Four Nations Summit series, whatever the hell they're going to call it, assign yourself four celebrity captains, so like Gretzky or pick Yager, whoever you want it to be, doesn't matter. and then assign 4 coaches. So let the NHL select 4 coaches, whether they're NHL coaches, if they're international folks, if they're outside of the game, however you want to do it, and then hold a draft so that you could theoretically have Leon Draisaitl's going to play, Roman Yossi's going to play, UC Saros is going to play. But UC Saros is finished, so he would be in this anyway. But like, you're going to get those players pulled into these four drafted teams. You play your international best on best. It's a little bit more of an all-star game type of situation, but because you have 4 teams, it's not just simply North America versus the world. Back in the late '90s, early 2000s. You're trying something a little different. It is still best on best, quote unquote, international play. It's an outside the NHL tournament, and you can then ramp up to the full shebang. I think that would be a little bit more interesting to me, at least, than leaving out 2, 3, 4 nations who otherwise should be included.
I mean, if you're going to do that, I mean that's just a week-long all-star game, and I can't. You're going to get, in theory, best on best, right? But I just I can't. I don't understand.
You don't think there's going to be buy-in?
I don't think the intensity level would be there.
It's fair,
You know what I mean? Like, who are you playing for? You know what I
right?
mean? Like, that's not to be quote the miracle and all this, but like, okay, it's best on best, and I'm playing for Team Yager. Like, okay, well, I'm a 23-year-old US kid. Like,
Right.
I saw Yarmer Yager play once when I was 11, and he was 42 years old on the Bruins. Like, he doesn't, it just doesn't. I mean, it doesn't resonate with me the way it would, I think it would for guys when you have the Trey Kroner on your chest, or the Maple Leaf, or whatever the case may be, and even those lesser playing nations. I mean, when Germany got the silver, wasn't they won the silver, right, in the Olympics over in
Yep.
South Korea? I mean, they were like celebrities.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I don't, I understand. I
I,
don't
I,
disagree with you at all. Like, that is the very obvious drawback, right? It's like,
yeah,
oh
I
well,
mean,
it's gonna be, yeah, it's McDavid, Crosby, and Eric Carlson are on a team. That's really cool and novel, but are the stakes high enough so that they would actually compete, or are they gonna
well,
go through
that's
the
the thing.
motions?
You
So
When you
yeah.
want best on best, people say we want McDavid and Crosby, we want Matthews and Eichel and Kane, and maybe not Kane, because Kane can't skate anymore. But you know what I mean? We want all of you. We want Stuchel and Draisaitl on the same line together. We want best on best for these matchups that the global we as hockey fans haven't had, and the opportunities to have are dwindling. You know what I mean? As
Hmm.
these newer stars kind of take over, for lack of a better term, the generation of stars that we kind of grew up with in our teens and college years. I mean, I like the idea, I like the creativity of it, but I know it's easier said than done, but I also realize that it's the NHL, so nothing is ever easy.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's why I mentioned it, because like there's
it,
no really great solution here. I also thought, and this came up in the Athletic Hockey Show, and I heard someone else say, maybe it was Jeff Merrick who said it. But if in lieu of a World Cup, especially if you can't get everyone involved, the USA Canada like showdown, but you alternate men's and women's games. I think
yeah,
that's great. I love that idea. And I think that could be a lot more interesting than, again, like a relatively toothless USA, Canada, Sweden, Finland series. But that's just me.
yeah. I mean, like, if you're going to do the 4 games, is it best out of 3? Is it 2-game total goal? Like, how do
Yeah.
you do that? And then at the same time, like, I like the idea of bringing the 2 women's teams in, but the gulf in the women's teams.
Oh, I would just make it USA, Canada. It would just be like border battle, pick your marketing term,
Yeah.
but it would just be like it's the new Summit series. So instead of Canada, Russia, it's the US and Canadians. You alternate the games. So it'd have to be an 8-game series, I guess. But like you alternate the games. So, men are playing game one, women play game two.
So it's 4 and 4 men and women's. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, you alternate it, or maybe the women lead it off. Doesn't that doesn't matter. But um like that's just, yeah, like I think that could be like that would be juicy, I think. But I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be fun. I mean, I still just go back to just give me 8 teams and, common sense needs to prevail here. I keep saying it, but I don't quite understand why it hasn't already.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and the other, there's also the other thing to consider in all of this is that the details are so preliminary still that we have a lot yet to learn. So it's going to evolve as we get closer to, I guess, as we get closer to a decision time, because the NHL, again, they're talking 2025. There's still a lot of runway here to figure out how they want us to structure it. So there's going to be more information that comes out about this. We are going to wrap up on that note, though. Let everyone get back to either their short work week or their holiday weekend. Appreciate you all joining us. We'll, of course, be back again next week for more Sabres and NHL talk. But until then, have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you soon.
So long.
Alrighty, man. This thing's being weird for me, so I'll let you depart because it's not letting me end the recording. So I got to end the call. Hopefully, it doesn't disappear on me. But
Okay, bud.
all right, I'll talk to you.
See ya.
See ya.